Hey everybody, John Bernakovich here with All Points Design. That's allpointsdesign.ca. And today we're talking with and for and to the Oregon. Yeah, gonna have to slow down. Oregon State University Permaculture Design Certificate Pro. This is the winter and spring 2022 class, and we are on office hour 5. Today, as usual, we're going to be going over questions and then taking a look at what's coming up, especially with the water conversation, and what to do next. So we'll be having that conversation. And because we had a bit of an issue with the Zoom passcode, we're going to be having a few folks jumping in a little later. So hopefully we'll get everybody on board. So what we're going to do is we've got a few folks coming in. So I think we'll start with Stephen and just talk a little bit about the conversation we had last week. So Stephen, from the question you had, which was about using water from the pool that's treated with chlorine to water plants, or about machinery and earthworks, was there any follow-up questions or clarification that we can jump into?
Yeah, so particularly around so regarding the pool and using that water, when it rains, the pool fills up with water. It's really good at holding water. That's kind of what pools do. So my question was really around, does it make sense to, instead of just taking that water and just dumping it on the ground and letting it run off down slope, does it make sense to put it in some separate basin that will, in a way that doesn't invite mosquitoes and such, off gas and then make it usable? Because I've kind of heard one of two things, which was you can, if depending on the chemicals that you're using, right? If you're using chlorine, it off gases in a certain number of days if it's exposed to the air. So that was sort of a little bit of clarity that I wanted to add, like when I was thinking about using pool water as opposed to just kind of pouring it on my plants. You're going to dump water, it's going to be diluted somewhat. Is there a way to sort of save it and make it so that it doesn't get wasted? I think we did a pretty good job at answering. Does anything come to mind around that, Javin?
Nothing that I would add besides saying the same thing. It's a chemical that you're not going to see in the concentrations you usually do in pool water in nature or in water in nature. So you have to kind of think of it from that perspective, from a plant's perspective. Like, would I ever find concentrations of chlorine in water to destroy all life? No. And for that reason, the organisms that are in life are actually usually viable or beneficial or biocompatible to those plants. So using it in that way can be problematic. And if you did put it into that situation, I'd want it to go through, an off-gassing pool and then probably through a small wetland before I necessarily brought it into something. I would, if that's what I had, but if you have other water, I'd probably go with that first.
Excellent. And then the other one that was a head scratcher was old pools burst. So it's an above ground pool. And one of the benefits of looking back through the history of the land and property is that this thing has been here for a long time. And I read that it is a pool that bursts. And it was my question was more around, how do you capture this in a design? Meaning, we're time traveling plant. So what's the way we say? We're sort of like time traveling, I guess, landscapers, or that's kind of like small, but we have to think not just for the design of today, but the design of 10 years from now, when this thing springs a leak and then eventually, because of the pressure, bursts in front of our beautiful annuals or on our annuals. And it was just sort of like, when you're thinking about this, how much effort do you put into sort of mitigating that risk by routing water or surfacing it in the design? So it's more of a designer question because, pools burst and it's been there for a while. So what do you think about, how do you think about that? How do you communicate that to a client? And then sort of how much actual, effort do you put into, just sort of thoughts around that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think when we're taking a look at water, we have to think of overflow or failure. So if we're taking a look at a dam, if we're taking a look at a rain barrel, if we're taking a look at an IBC toad, if we're taking a look at a cistern, we have to think about failure and what happens if that fails. And in a pool situation, and I'm just pulling up your design here, But in a pool situation, I would imagine something that would capture that water on grade and then potentially either bring it into some system or conversation that made sense. And as I take a look at your site here, and I'll share my screen just so it's very clear. So as I see that your pool is here, and if these contours can be trusted, generally it's heading towards the northwest of the property. Is that right? The slope?
That is right. That is
Okay,
right.
cool.
Yes.
So, I might be tempted to put a low grade swale just below it, and we can zoom in. We don't have to. What is this? A drawing for ants? Here we go. Okay. Brown. Yeah, I would think something like this, that some kind of swale here that comes into the trees and maybe overflows this way could be one of those things that would use that water in some kind of effective way. But at the same time, there's no infrastructure below that pool. So it doesn't really seem like there's much to be worried about in terms of total water loss. So if that were to burst, I don't know if it would be a huge issue in terms of if it burst, if it would get close to the house. I may do something along here that just suggests that if it does burst, that the water decide to move away from and down from the house. So if it does seem like it's too close, and if it did have a burst on that side, you would get that volume of water coming and slushing against the side of the house and then potentially coming into the basement or affecting the foundation, then I might do some kind of berm or some kind of check to suggest that the water move down slope.
Actually, just to kind of like add a little bit more to this, the reason I didn't overlay the contour lines onto this map and actually draw them out is because I do want to confirm them. And there's a small misperception, I think, in it. The slope goes from the highest point is northwest, sort of like the top left peak, and then it all goes downhill from there. So the pool water would actually come down towards, I guess, that tree on the bottom, that orange circle. But I guess the same thing kind of applies, essentially build some sort of an emergency swale to guide most of that out and away, because, we have a ton of sun exposure on the front, so we're probably going to plant a good amount of annuals there. And yeah, so just build some sort of diversion there, and that this would be in the design, you think, as far as top priority, put this in, this is going to burst at some point.
Yeah, one of the things that people usually get wrong in design is that they're not ensuring the assets that they have for longevity. So without fail, and there's very few populaces in the world, definitely not the civilized world, that realize that the valleys belong to water. And so you'll see roads all the time in valleys. You'll see them directly in the path of water. If you want a horror story, take a look at Highway 8 in British Columbia, Canada. A few months ago, we had major rains, and Vancouver, Canada, second largest metropolis in Canada, was cut off from the rest of Canada completely by road due to washout, a rock slide. And Highway 8, they think it's going to take 2 years to rebuild. 2 years to get a major highway back in operation, because the highway follows the river and it crosses all of these drainages. So first thing I hold as a rule is there is no water infiltration 3 meters, 10 feet thereabouts beside the house. And there'll be a lot of designers out there that will drop little basins and all the rest beside the house, but the house is expensive. And if anybody's watching inflation or anything else that's happening right now, it's getting more expensive, not to mention the building materials. So you want to ensure asset against at least water damage, if not more. So I'd make sure to keep that water away from the house as much as possible and put it into productive use. So if it is just off site, that's great. And then goes into like, perennials are great at dealing with extra chemical load. So even if you had a small coppice here of, let's call it aspen or deciduous, or it was a small little area that you were using, that would be fine. I would see no problem in that.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry, my little gardener came in.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sweet. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And thanks so much, everybody, for jumping in. Sorry about the passcode issue there. There was a change because of something else in my Zoom account, and it messed up this meeting. So moving forward. Adria, nice to see you. Okay, so we've got a question here, and I'm just going to share the screen again. I've been creating trails along the contours of the slopes of the wooded area of my property. This seems like a good idea to ask about the value of inslope versus outsloped versus level paths. While I'm trying to create the trails on contour for ease of walking, the presence of large trees, boulders, etc., means that the trails are on contour in some areas and off contour in others. The site has great drainage. I've never seen it standing water anywhere. The soil is already moist, and most of the pathogens present are humid related. I'm thinking that helping to slowly build the groundwater and avoid creating standing water is the goal. My inclination is to create in-slope trails, mostly to avoid soil erosion down the slope and to direct water to absorb along ditch or hinge. Love to hear your thoughts or merits on insloped, outslope, level paths in this scenario. And she's given us a wonderful diagram. So this is a great question. And this is a microcosm for all earthworks. Remember that pathways are earthworks. And when we take grade and we change it, we're changing the hydrology of the landscape. So you could imagine that grade might look something like so, and A equals B. And so in this case, not quite, but if we took a look at it, and if I was a little bit more judicious and careful, we have what is called our cut or our borrow pit, and we have our berm or what's being created here. So in essence, what the question is when you're looking at this, when water comes down slope, water is going to come down, drop down, and it's going to pick up speed. And there's a soil erosion triangle, and one of the issues is speed. So if water can pick up speed, it becomes more erosive. Volume is another issue, and it builds up more. And so as we're taking a look at this, and as the water is coming down from this, there's going to be a potential here for some erosion. Now, in this scenario, we have water that comes down and then continues down. There will still be some scouring here, always is. And you end up what's called a guttering effect, where basically the scouring will build a small pocket of gutter over time. And the particulars of this design are important. One, we have a porous soil, so there's never standing water. And so we know that it has high porosity. We also have another issue in terms of most of the pathogens are humidity related or humid related. So more water equals more pathogen. So the question is, do we hold, store, and sink water, or do we allow the water to run off? If we're doing a terrace, same conversation. Terraces can be flat, terraces can be what's called back graded, or they can be front graded or slope graded. So we can do any of these conversations. As we're taking a look at this, and as we're taking a look at the particulars of the context of this design site, it's always about the context. The key is always in the context. It's always about what is the contextual reasons for why we would do this here. So let's take it again. So it's porous soil, generally has good water, and especially in and around the forest, and generally has pathogens with humidity. Is that right? Is there anything else to add there?
That's about it. Just trying to avoid erosion, I think, is the other issue. Soil erosion is the other factor in this.
Okay. So my default for pathways is to do what I call backgraded, or what we're calling back cut or inboard here, to have something that comes back into the slope and holds water. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One, in a forest, the moment you create a level place, you'll find that your pathways become nurseries. And so you'll have tree seeds that will fall down, and you'll get all of these incredible little tree seedlings that will pop up in the little nooks and crannies of these little hinges or these small crotches. And so you'll get these areas that actually become places, repositories, natural nurseries that you can just grab and transplant and start to move in. The second thing is that as you're building these types of structures, you'll find that you'll start to see the amount of erosion that happens here, or potentially the amount of humidity that might be created. But because there's no standing water, I'm ruling out the humidity all of a sudden. I don't feel like this is going to add to it. This would be something I would test. I would do probably two. I'd probably do one that was towards and one that's away, and I'd monitor them for a year. If you're working in the iOS ecosystem, there's an application called GPS Kit, which is a geo-referenced photograph theodolite. So basically it has the ability to give 360 degree. It has the ability to do vertical angle, but it can also take photos. And the great thing about this is you can export those photos to Google Earth Pro, and you can put them into a separate folder called site visits or site observations. This was game changing for me. I've been doing this for 10 years, about 9 years ago. And then when I moved to the Android ecosystem, I then had to find a new one, and I'm just now evaluating Gaia GPS, which works pretty good. It's not as simple as GPS Kit. I no longer say the price of applications, because when you buy them, that's the price you think of. And then all of a sudden you'd say this and it's double or whatever. So it's a cost. It's worth it for me. I pay for it. But I would do that and then take photos of this. So you've got photos that have a time, they have a location stamp, and ideally they have a place that you can view them. That's easy. And that's why I use Google Earth Pro in this way, because I can go back and take a look at these photos. But I would move towards this configuration because of the different context pieces that you were telling me about.
Great. That was my inclination, but I just wasn't sure, exactly what the goals are in an area where it drains completely. It's really, in my mind, more about preventing soil erosion and trying to, just slow the water down, but not create any standing pools. And then there are those areas where it's, completely on contour, where I could see how you could maybe get a little water in the ditch line, depending on if there's compaction of the soil there. But I guess that's the kind of thing you can just watch, right? You can see if that starts to happen, and you can, just sort of grade it down if it does.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you'll find that if this goes on long enough, if you have this trail that runs long enough, this will pick up speed and will start to incise and will start to erode. So a couple of things about these operations is probably the easiest thing is to put little tiny check dams, what's called one rock dams, along that ditch. So that's just taking a collection of rocks and then putting them in that area. So that way the water hits that and then moves from a channelized stream flow into a sheet flow, and then it'll move back and it'll go back and forth and back and forth. What you may find eventually, and this is a good piece for everyone to know, what you may find is that when you get down to a section where it's actually building quite a bit, you may want to design something that transports the water from here to the bank because it's built up too much volume. And so one of the things we'll do in that is called a rolling dip. So if this is a road in plan view, so we're looking out from a bird's eye view, a rolling dip is a structure that will take the water very, very passively and move it to the side of the area. So if this is the length of our car, a rolling dip, the trough of it is as wide as the car is long. And so that way you really don't feel it in the car. It's one of the coolest things I learned right when I was starting, because all across the West Coast, we would make these little tiny speed bumps. And because of the incision of water, they become big speed bumps, because over time the water would scour out on the uphill side. And so you'd have these massive mounds that looked like school speed bumps, but you started with a really tiny mound. And so a rolling dip is a really easy way. It takes a bit more time and energy. That's definitely one of the costs of this. But a rolling dip is basically a place where this is our trough, and then this is our berm. And so what happens is when water, and it's graded in a certain way to bring the water from one side to the other. And so if the water's coming down this way, it moves off slope like this. So in cross section, what this would look like is we'd have a really gentle rise and a really gentle fall. And then we'd have our car for scale, no wheels because it takes too much time. But this then gives us the opportunity to bring water through here and then off instead of having like a big speed bump that would take it that way. And if you're looking for the book, it's the Quervo Coalition Erosion Control Guide, readily available on their website. It's a PDF. They also have a Spanish version as well. Wonderful book. We just completed a low-tech erosion control course with regenerative living with Neil Bertrando and Jeffrey Adams, and it was one of the most complete courses I've ever seen on the subject. And this is one of the low-tech erosion control processes we use. But I could imagine, size this to person now, and it's the same thing on this pathway. So it's the exact same sizing for the person. So if the person is, 2 to 3 feet in terms of their arm span and width, that would generally be what you would be looking at. And that would help to create that erosion deterrent and pathway. Because you have to think, there's the thieves of water, and one of them is erosion. So we want to stop that as much as possible.
Great. Okay, great. That's how I'll move forward with it. I've been, sort of as I'm clearing, branches and things out of the way of this path, I'm building up sort of a natural fence, which I'm assuming I'm going to use as the basis of just a minor little sort of hugel mound in what they're calling this outboard hinge here in this diagram. And so what I'm imagining I'm going to do is come back through, as you said, it's just sloped, just a regular slope right now. And I'm going to use a grading rake to come in and create that, as they're calling this inboard hinge or an insloped trail. So that's the plan. I'll
Awesome.
share photos.
Great. And it doesn't have to be much. It only needs to be a percentage or a degree or two. Like, it just needs to be a little tilt. I think some people do this like quite dramatically, and it doesn't need to be that, just a little tilt. Like, it's barely imperceptible to our eye, but when it comes to water, water sees it all.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. New questions. I saw a video of the course that was referring to animal protein. Are there any tips for people to grow plant protein? I'm concerned about sustainability, and I believe more people could have the opportunity to do so. Any tips for growing plant protein? You mean in terms of pulses like beans and lentils and legumes? Are we talking about other types of protein? What specifically are we talking about? Oh, you're very, very quiet.
Sorry, let me see.
Oh, there we go.
I would talk very close to the microphone. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, as I said, the legumes, beans, anything. I don't know how these things would grow because I usually just buy them on a bag on the supermarket. So I don't know, because I just eat plant proteins and I don't have any problem with no protein in my diet, but I have no idea which plants would be easy enough to grow in a small scale since I don't have a farm.
Gotcha. No, great question. So pulses are amazing as a food crop. And let's see if my pulse book is right there. The Power of Pulses. Wonderful book by a good colleague and friend of mine, Dan Jason of the Seed Sanctuary of Canada and Salt Spring Seeds. The Power of Pulses, fantastic book, goes into detail about different types of pulses, how to grow them, and the process of which. And while funny enough, these permaculture design courses are not about growing food, they're about the ideas about growing food, but it's something that's a big passion project of mine. So this year, myself and Indigenous off-grid farmer and traditional skills teacher Natalie Pepin, we have a big audacious goal to reach 10,000 people about food security and help 1,000 people improve their food security this year. So pulses are one of those things. And when we're taking a look at pulses, especially taking a look at some of the bigger pulses, our favas, our broad beans, our bush beans, our pole beans. And I'm going to wax on a little bit here. They are prolific. They are gorgeous and beautiful, and the colors of them are phenomenal, and they can serve a multitude of functions for our site. So last year, I ran a number of high tensile wires up the south side of my property. The reason for that is we get a huge amount of sun here. It's orthographic inland effect. We get massive beat down of sun. And the more surface area that your buildings are being able to see the sun, the hotter your building will be. This is one of these tricks we're finding in regenerative passive design, is to have a big hat, so to speak, on your house. So that way the sun, the summer sun, never sees your wall system. So the eaves go over the walls and can't see them. The people who built this house didn't know that. And so I've been creating a green screen on the south side of my property to uptake all that solar resource. Because again, resource in too much population is pollution. And so instead of taking that resource, turning it into the pollution of excess heat, which then moves us out of the front room of our house, sometimes down into the basement, it got to 53 degrees centigrade here during the summer. Look that up in Fahrenheit. It's a fun little moment. So what we were doing is we were growing all of these scarlet runner beans up the side of the house. Beautiful leaves, beautiful variegation, wonderful food source. Favas can be used like any other plant source, but the majority of our pulses are nitrogen fixing. So one of the tricks and the tips that I use and a number of colleagues use is we'll usually have a sacrificial crop in the early season where we'll grow a big swack of pulses and favas. Favas are my favorite because you get so much out of one little seed, and you're taking poundage off a plant. But some of those plants at flower, and this is true for all nitrogen fixers, we cut down at flowering. This is the highest potential of nitrogen in a plant that will then shed that nitrogen into the soil. So we cut down and we chop and drop. And what this does is it sinks that nitrogen into the ground. So if you have heavy feeding crops like tomatoes or other types of heavy feeders, that then becomes the bed that you then plant the tomatoes in. And because most pulses are cool season crops, they work better in cool season than shoulder season. They don't love the sun. They don't do tremendously well in the sun. If you ever find good pulses that work well in the sun, hoard those seeds, use those during the hot seasons of your summer. And everyone has different seasons. But generally, pulses do really well in the early season, really well in the late season, and you can usually get 2 or 3 crops depending on how you pick. Because of the verticality of pulses, they work really well in small spaces and with verticality. And so for those of you that are working in balconies, it's a great place to create a small box that's usually a wicking bed or a hugel wicking bed or something to that effect, and then have a lettuce or trellis structure up the back that you can grow up. That then leaves you space on the front of the bed to potentially do different herbs or lettuces. Especially when we're talking about small spaces, we want to increase the number of high quality crops on that small space versus growing things that are readily available. So in small spaces, I don't suggest onions or potatoes. They take a lot of space. That being said, it's fun to do vertical potato towers and see the prolific amount of potatoes you can grow in a tower. But pulses are relatively easy. They tend to be sown by seed. So you tend to just plant them directly. All the pulses are different. If you take a look at your seed package, it'll tell you generally when to plant in your biome. Generally, the depth of planting seeds is 2 times the seed height. So with pulses being this big, we're going down 2 to 3 of those depths down. And this just ensures that there's enough light occlusion. So that way the seed goes, oh, I'm in darkness and I'm watered. It's time to grow. And something that's interesting about pulses that not a lot of people know is that pulses developed, many of them, if not the majority of them, developed digestion inhibitors. This is where you get the whole beans give you gas conversation. Because they have that inhibitor in them, unless they have been sprouted, that inhibition within that seed is still alive. And so you don't get all the nutrition necessary out of that bean. So yes, you can cook beans from dry to fully cooked in a pressure cooker or even in a pot. But the reason why they have that inulin and those gaseous compounds is because that's the inhibition, the inhibitors within the bean. So soaking them twice for me is what I do. I soak them once, drain them out, let them dry for a day, soak them again, dry for a day, 2 to 3 days before you cook them. But the result is phenomenal. But that also means that it's important to do a soak of our beans before we put them in the ground. So this first soak doesn't usually produce a protuberant radical. It's usually just a little bit of a descending of the bean, but you can also just put it directly into the ground. So what I would say is in Florida, you've probably got the pick of the litter for beans that'll grow. But especially coming into the summer season, I'd be conscientious about more of the warm loving ones. And you may want to take a look at amaranth. Amaranth has protein in it as well. And there's a number of leaf crops that have protein. Hippophae rhamnoides, which I don't think will grow well down in Florida, but for those of us in cold climate, Hippophae rhamnoides, also called sea buckthorn, is one of, if not the most nutritional plant we can grow in the Northern Hemisphere. Single vitamin has more omega-3, 6, and 9 fatty acids than a fillet of fish compared to the berry. A single berry has more vitamin C. The fat within it is so phenomenal that when you leave it out, it'll separate into its fat content and into its non-fat content, and is just a delight to behold. And while in North America, we do not have a tradition of sea buckthorn, if you look up sea buckthorn in Finland, in Norway, in Sweden, they have grocery aisles dedicated to sea buckthorn because of its incredible nutraceutical compounds, and it's amazing topical. So skin issues, moisturizing issues, it has a phenomenal level of that.
Can I just ask you to write the name of this? Can you just write the name of this? Because I will try to Google it.
Sure.
The name of this plant.
Great. I've been researching microgreens and sprouts, especially for people with no access to land in urban areas. Do you have any tips on that? I do. I ran a urban microgreen company called Eat, Shoots and Leaves. And if anybody knows the grammar book by the same name, it was a total ripoff. And I'm so glad they didn't come after us. Basically, it was a way for us to get into farming in a very easy way in a short amount of time. So let's talk microgreens. So the difference between a microgreen and a sprout is a microgreen is grown usually in soil, and you're usually just eating the top cotyledon. So it's the first sprout with the first 2 leaves. You're not waiting for true leaves. You're going for the first new leaves. And basically the reason for this is that the nutrition in the seed becomes the cotyledon in essence. And there's a couple of species that work really well. Pea is phenomenal and tasty and super easy to grow. It's the easiest of the three common ones that I'll talk about. Basically, you take a soil mix, and I've used everything from potting mix to custom mixes because most of the nutrition is in the seed. You don't need a lot of nutrition in the mix. And so you can just use potting mix. You can use general potting mix that comes from the store. You usually want to use shallow trays. And so I've got a bunch of leftover shallow trays from my days in my microgreen business. And so I think they're 1/2 inch, if I remember correctly. I could go grab one. They're about 1/2 inch. And basically you fill that up, you make sure it's nice and flat, you pre-wet it, pre-soak it. And then with pea seed, you basically layer the entire top of this. So they're side by side by side by side by side. And then you weight it. So I'll take another seed tray, put it on top, and I'll put 20-pound weights on it, and I'll put it in the dark. The reason for this is we're simulating the weight of the soil, and we're simulating the darkness that the seed would get without any sort of light. Then when the combined might of all those seeds are lifting up 20 to 40 pounds of weight, which is one of these wonderful moments when you realize that the human ingenuity to move things and lift things is nothing compared to the incredible resiliency of nature. Then you take that off, and now it's in its growth phase. So it's out of its seeding phase and it's into its growth phase. And then what I've done in the past is I've used stainless steel wire shelving units. You don't have to do this. You can just put it on a windowsill and let it be. And you can do this in any size. So I'm just talking about commercial scale production. You can do this in a small 4x4 pot. You can do this in a small plate. You can do this in any way, shape, or form. You can also do this on paper towel. Doesn't work as well, but you can do it this way.
Yeah, I have a question about that. I was thinking about using a stainless steel wire to act as the ground, just because I was afraid to have little mosquitoes and bugs that I had in a previous apartment. I had a little garden in containers, and a lot of little mosquitoes and little bugs kind of killed the plants. They were just eating the plants.
Okay.
And I'm afraid the microgreens, this problem can happen with them if I put on soil, especially if I have another plant growing in a soil in the apartment. Do you think there is a possibility on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've never really had that problem in my climate. And so I imagine that's probably climate dependent. And what I would do is experiment. I would try it out, try your stainless steel tray and see how it works. I think with sprouts, it's a lot easier with the method that I do, because with sprouts, I just take a mason jar and I've bought a couple of screen lids. They're relatively easy to find. You can find them from Johnny Seeds or Mum Seeds, who both supply sprouting seeds in bulk. And I'll soak them for a day. I'll drain them, and then I'll usually drain them into a plant pot. So I just take the whole jar. It's sitting right now in a Desert King fig, and it just drains out the excess water into that. And because of that small pore size, there's not space for insects to get into that. And then basically I just rinse them every day until it just fills the entire jar as a terrarium. And then I've got as many sprouts as I need. So I would say if you're worried about standing water or moist soil attracting insects, I'd probably go the sprout route, and I'd probably experiment with the microgreens and find something that works.
Yeah, think about growing the microgreens outdoors. Like,
Oh yeah. Yeah, that works
is
fine
that
too.
okay. That's cool. Thanks.
Yeah, so the way it works outside is very similar. So if you've got a bed, and this is important, you really want to rake the bed and make sure it's level and flat, because if there's any sort of crenulations or gradations, you'll find that the seeds won't germinate in the same standardized rate. And you really do want to get a standardized rate, because what you're going to do is you're going to come along and you're going to cut them with a knife. And so you want that full amount. But similar thing, outside we used a piece of plywood and sized it to our beds and put some weights on it. So similarly, wet the soil, or spread the soil, wet the soil, spread the level the soil again, put down your seed mix. So you can use pea, you can use sunflower, you can use radish, you can use kale, you can use bull's blood. You can, man, there were so many microgreens, especially in the upper end chefing world. They wanted crazy specific things. But you put those all down, you put on your weight. So in this case, we're using plywood. It comes up, you take that off, and then you're off to the races. If you're in urban centers and cats are an issue, we created sort of raised wire. So we took chicken wire and we stretched it across the beds, and then the cats couldn't walk on it and pull it out or go to the bathroom within the beds. And that worked out really well. So I would say working with those two would be the way I'd go at it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks everybody for all the comments. We're getting some great comments about Steve's just trucking along. Thanks so much for that. Really bringing out the different links for the books. Yes, 127.4 Fahrenheit. That is correct. I'm glad you did the math. We lived in the basement. One thing about the heat dome, though, which I found out this past summer, which was really interesting, is that Elaeagnus umbellata and Elaeagnus multiflora, the gumi family, so the shrub gumi and the tree gumi, both thrived in the heat. So I'm actively populating and propagating more of those, because we're going to have to start planning for heat in that sort of range. Okay, great. 2 questions and done. All right. So let's pop over to the template, and we're moving on to, and I'm just going to check in with everybody. Next assignment is water, correct? Is that where we're moving on to? Okay, cool. So moving on to water, we really want to get a sense of the large scale and the small scale, the macro and the micro. So we're trying to get a sense of what are we looking at in terms of water. So first and foremost, we're looking for drinking water source. Where does that water come from? What is the watershed? And then what is the treatment? And then how does it get to you? And then where does your water go? What is it treatment? And where does it end up to? So 3 things there. From the watershed, what's the watershed you're in? Where does that water come out of? What treatment process does it go through? And sometimes it comes out of my well and it goes into the pipes. Sometimes it goes to the local municipality. Sometimes it goes to a community water treatment center. We want to know what those elements are. And then where does it go? So does it go to our septic tank? And then if it's septic, what's the maintenance cycle? When was it last maintained? Do you know those things? And if not, good things to find out. And maybe it's municipal. Maybe it goes over to the wastewater treatment plant. And then I want you to go through the process of learning about the wastewater treatment plant, what happens there, how does it go back into the water. I worked briefly at a wastewater treatment plant in Edmonton, and it was a fascinating view into taking care of human needs. This is a bit of a recap, taking a look at what is the record 24-hour rainfall, yearly average rainfall for your site or the closest place. What's the impact of major precipitation events? So take a look through the history of the site. Has there been major events? Generally, when I'm designing for sites, I will design for the average rainfall plus 50 to 100%, sometimes more these days, depending on what I find for major precipitation events in the past. What are the roofing materials on the design site? So we want to know, is it metal? Is it asphalt? If it is asphalt, or if it is metal, or if it's anything else, what is the age? And if you don't know, guess. We're going to do that scientific process called guessing. The reason for this is, especially when you come to asphalt shingles, there was an amazing study done years ago in Sweden, and they found that after 5 years, the off-gassing of asphalt shingles was comparable to metal roofs for rainwater harvesting. That is to say that what came off the roof was generally decent in terms of what we would do for water capture. And definitely take a look at all the rainwater resources within the course, because you'll learn about first flush diverters and all of these other pieces. I will say this once, I will say this twice, I will say this many times to you in your work, because it seems like this misses a lot of people's attention. If you hold water, if you redirect water in any way, shape, or form, you must design for overflow. Water that comes in eventually will go out. And when you finally run the numbers on your site and you realize how much water falls on your site, you will realize that anything we capture and store, be it above ground pool, swale, dam, rain barrel, is literally a drop in the bucket. So you must design for overflow. And I will take marks away. And if you want those marks, you will have to do it again. So just skip all that, manage the overflow. As usual, the SWOT analysis is about this assignment. So from this assignment, what have you learned? What makes sense now on your site? What have you learned about the water survey? What does where the water come from tell you about your water? And you might get into pipes. You might find, oh, interesting, the pipes in my city are X age, and the studies are showing that X is in the water. I never knew that. I may want to design around that. Remember, the SWOT analysis is about the lens of the assignment. Again, if you don't use the question and answer to ask me any questions, delete it. Microshed watershed practice sheet. Okay, big spoiler, this is exactly how to do this assignment. No one should get this wrong, ever, ever. I've given you the assignment sheet. I walk through it step by step by step. I go through the whole assignment. No one should get this wrong. If you get this wrong, you're very much telling me you're not going through the work. And I really like taking away marks for not doing the practice sheet. This is the only time in the entire course where I'm like, I'll take those away. The big thing we want to think about here, folks, and the thing that Andrew wants folks to understand is that everything has a watershed, and depending on where you are. So if this is the design site, you always start at the bottom corners of the design site, because anything below that design site is no longer technically in the watershed capture of this site. You go up to the high points. This will show up. It'll show you where to put the high points here. We'll also go into the fact that contours are just slices of a site. They're our best guess. Some people, some designers out there are saying contours are the language of a landscape. No, the landscape's the language of the landscape. This is just a way for us to get a thin slice. So above this, we actually have no idea what this could be. This could be a total plateau, or it could actually come up to 2 points, which is most likely what happens. So on this area, we interpolate, we do that scientific word of guessing where these are, and you get to guess. You'll see my guess in the video. Hint, it's here and here. And it's your choice to whatever you want to do with that. When you get to saddles, these are places between 2 high points, we take the middle between the saddle. I'm basically doing the video again because, as you can see, it irritates me slightly that this happens, but I digress. We're also taking a look for the major water flows. So where are the major water flows and where do they collect and store? Do not put a direct line down a ridge without watching the water flows at right to 90 degrees. You'll see in previous videos that I've already done, and I will do it again right now because I've got the time. As you're going on a ridge, that water spreads out. There is no channelized flow on a ridge. So if you do this, I will know you don't know. The point of this work is so that way, when these assignments come in, the words that I'm saying and the words that are coming out of the course, we recognize that and we know you understand because you are accurately representing water flow on the site. When we get to valleys, well, now all of a sudden there is concentrated flow. So if you do something like this, no problem, because it is a concentrated, possibly channelized flow, depending on if there's vegetation there. So in summary, no reason to get this wrong. And I really hope you do it well. Moving to macro watershed. Okay, so people get frustrated by this because they don't understand what's macro and micro. And it has a level of subjective reasoning. So the macro is we're trying to get a sense of what's the largest watershed you're in. And in most countries, if you take a look at river shed watersheds or river watersheds, you're going to get that macro river watershed, and that's the one we want. When you get to micro, it becomes a bit more subjective. And if you look into the tutorials, you'll see that the site that I used was in an urban context, and with Urbana in place, those beautiful maps no longer make sense. And unless you can get all the detailed specificity of a complete urban hydrology map, which no one can ever find, you're not going to know. So you'll have to go out and actually view your landscape and take a look at gutters and see how gutters are flowing down the roads and whatnot. And you're going to have to make some educated guesses. Remember, any assumptions you make, just put as a note at the bottom of your assignment. Went out, took a look at this. This seems to be what my minor watershed, my micro watershed is. If you're in a rural subset, you're basically trying to see where is the height of land that actually flows onto my site. And so sometimes when folks send me a micro watershed and they give me contours, I can comment on it and I can say, okay, great. Yeah, that looks like a high point. That looks like a high point. Okay, well, here's a spot where it looks like it actually influences. But if all you give me is a map that has a general outline of the watershed, you get the good old, looks good, because I have no idea, right? So just make sure that you get a sense of how much water, where that water is flowing onto your site. This is the big one. This is where we really do get to get a sense of how does the water flow on your site. So in this water flow map, what we're looking at is what's the total water flow on your site? Where does it enter? Where does it exit? And that's why those are 2 different colors. So you know where it generally enters and exits, because we want you to start thinking, how does this water enter and exit this conversation? Then we want to know and split off the water flows. I will say this once, I will say this twice, I will say this 3 times. Make sure to delineate your water flow to gutters, downspouts, or roof lines. I say that because not everyone has downspouts, not everyone has gutters, and not everyone has direct roof lines. So that's the order of operation. If you do have a downspout, make sure you divide by looking at your gutter. If your gutter is central on your side of your house and it was installed correctly, I installed gutters for a while, it will be high in the center and it'll be low on the side. So basically you can take your roof and you can split it in 2. And this is what Lauren did. So you can see here, she's taken this roof structure, she split it out if you do this type of split out, you will have my undying accolades, because this is beautiful. This is a great way to take a look at it. So you go down to these different downspout, and you're actually now in a downspout volume. The reason for that is normally we take that water off of the downspout and we use that in volume. So this is a great way to do it. If you don't have downspouts, then all of this roof would be one roof, and you would only do this one roof. And then all of the different calculations would make more sense. Generally, we're taking a look at anything to do with water in our legend. Again, we can use hand drawn if we like, and we can also do that splitting in hand drawn as well. All spigots we want, all contour lines. If you put a contour line on your map, you must put the elevation in it, and you must put the units on the elevation. As I talked about before, I like to have my contour lines just generally go a bit off scope, or as in Lauren's case, she's given us a little space around so we can tell what's going on just out of scope and out of slope. This is the preferred way I like to do my maps. This course doesn't require you to do that, so I'm still within the purview of the course, but this is what I highly suggest. No land exists inside the boundary of a property boundary. It always has context. Then we have impermeable surfaces, so permeable and impermeable. And if you want to go for the extra added bonus of showing all the impermeable surface and doing the water calculations for that, which is how we size earthworks, I highly recommend you do that. I do it for all my designs, but we're not requiring it in this assignment. We insert a chart of precipitation by month. What is the total site, average rainfall, and then depending on if you are in imperial or if you are in metric, you will follow one or the other of these formulas. If you only work in imperial, only use the imperial formula. If you only work in metric, only use the metric formula. Do not switch. Then we get to the chart. So you'll see that we've got an entire runoff coefficient table. So if you want to find the different runoff coefficients, you can find them there, with the caveat that it's always different for each site. So, a clay soil in one place is not a clay soil in another. And here's a stumper for everybody. There is no irrigation calculator, which is where runoff coefficient tables come from and engineering tables come from. There is no runoff calculator. There's no irrigation calculator that includes organic matter. A percentage of organic matter on an acre of land will increase water holding capacity by 20,000 gallons, 80,000 liters. And you will never get that in an irrigation calculator. So there is a bit of craftsmanship. There is a bit of art that comes into this. Video tutorials are up here, and I've also created a Google sheet with metric calculations, which if you work in imperial, you could copy and change the volumetric calculations if you wanted, and then just copy that and bring it back in. If you want a tutorial on how to do that, you go all the way down to the budget and phasing chart down in the final assignment right here. And there's a whole tutorial about how to bring in this as a chart from an outside sheet and have it active. Really cool interconnectivity between Google. It's one of the reasons why I've switched a lot of my work over to Google. The ethical implications of that and being siloed in a digital space is a whole nother conversation, but you work with what you have. So what's the location? Is this roof 1, roof 2? So this will directly relate back to this map. Extra points for people who color code. What's the material? What's the area in square footage, meters squared? What's the yearly annual rainfall in feet or meters? What is the maximum 24-hour rainfall that's been recorded? What's the runoff coefficient? And then your volumes. So yearly runoff and max 24-hour runoff. Make sure that your finals are in liters and gallons. Do not put the old quotation marks, the dittos. You must put, if it's 650 mil all the way down the chart. Then we've got our total roof and our total site. If you want to do this exact same chart for your impermeable surfaces, highly recommend you do. Great. If not, totally fine. Don't have to worry about it. But I do it for all my rainwater harvesting calculations, because once you get into swales and dams and all these water harvesting calculations have to be done anyways. So good practice. Finally, if you want to then go into your micro watershed and show what the total volume is that comes into your micro watershed and onto your site, this is that final map, or that final assignment, which you'll get extra credit for. Again, SWOT analysis is for this assignment. And I love that people are starting to get annoyed that we haven't started designing yet. Welcome to full holistic design. It's a full holistic picture. We're trying to take in all the pieces. We're not trying to be conventional architects that go, I've never looked beyond the boundaries of the scope of the project. This is about inclusion. This is about the harmonies of nature that come into effect when you go, oh, wait a second, kids come up to my western border. I should probably plant a little snack track there and feed them because idle hands. So there's all of these little pieces that really come into bear. And as some folks get annoyed with the SWOT analysis being like, well, I'm coming up with the same answers. That's the point. The point is to go, oh, wait a second, the same thing is coming up over and over and over. I've confirmed what I'm thinking. I've confirmed what I'm seeing. Or all of a sudden I get to water. It's like, oh, wait a second. That thing that I thought was a strength in terms of the slope is a weakness because I've got my house in front of it. Huh. All right. Time to design. And it's always a good time to redesign. So for anybody that's feeling frustrated about that, I hear you. And yet this is the process. The process is to really take that time and experience and go, okay, what's happening? What are we looking at? What's going on? Recently, I just got asked to evaluate 5 different properties for somebody who's buying a piece of land. I use a SWOT analysis. What's the strengths of this? What's the weaknesses? What's the threat, opportunities and threats? And if they want it, I always ask them if they want it, they'll be like, of the goals that we have, what's your opinion of the one we should choose? This one, right? But ultimately, I like giving people scorecards and saying, you know, make your own choices because I'm not you and I'm not going to live here for 100 years or more. Great. So I'm going back to chat. Any questions for that? Feel free to unmute or put in the Q&A. Can we go over strategies for climates where most of the precipitation is snow? Yes, we can. We'll do that next. Actually, Kara, can you put that into the Q&A doc? What's the advice for slide 67, living in a balcony and living room? Please put that into the Q&A. I'll put that up next. It's a beefy assignment. You better believe it. Yeah. I have a design. I'll bring it up if you want, if we got some time at the end. But I have a design that took me well over a week to understand the roof flow because it was one of these architects' dreams, builders' nightmares. And I think there was like 37 different roof structures in terms of surfaces that the sky saw. And it took me about a week to look at it because we're always taking a look at ortho photographs to finally get a sense of how they all piece together. It was brutal. Okay, let's go back to the Q&A. Awesome. So Kara, what are water rainfall catchment strategies for climates where most of the precip is snow? Great question. So one of the strategies for climates where most of the rainwater catchment is snow is to make sure that you think about the rainwater as solid and that over time that solid will melt as it's happening right now in my region, very, very slowly. Spring is very, very slowly coming along. And to that effect, you want to think about how that then charges your landscape. So I think we talked about my biggie hugelkultur by my shop. Have we talked about that in this course yet? No? Haven't talked about it? Okay, cool. So I'll just do a little drawing here. I need to do a whole video about this at some point. If people would stop calling for work, I could do more videos, but I'm not arguing. So I've got this shop. The side of the shop produces about 30,000 liters of water a year and doesn't have a gutter because of our snow load. So our snow load generally rips gutters off. Cool. So what I did is last year, 2.5 years ago, I brought in an excavator, cost me about 575 bucks. And this excavator came in and dug me a big E trench. And this trench was about 1.5 meters or 2 meters by 1.5 meters or 2 meters all the way along here. So big stinking trench. What we did is we did a massive hugelkultur there. So we took rotting logs. Oh yes, we did talk about this. Good. Okay, cool. Don't have to go over it again. So what I'm doing right now is I'm watching and have done throughout the entire winter when we had these small minor snow melts, and I'll use light blue for snow because white just ain't going to show up. So I've been watching all this snow build up, drop down, and basically charge up this entire bed. And it's phenomenal to watch because I know that whole thing is charging for my entire year. I'm watching it charge up. When we take a look at swales, and this is an important piece as well, snow on swales will actually hold as well. That was a terrible swale. Let's try again. So one of the things that we talk about all the time is that swales are tree growing systems, and they are. They pair best with trees. Now, the great thing about swales as tree growing systems is trees act as shade. So if we have this as a system that holds snow, which it will, this then has a lower, slower melt process in the spring. One of the things we're trying to avoid in most of our systems, one of the things we're trying to create is a prison for water in our systems. We're trying to create a massive prison where water cannot escape. A drop that falls on our property stays on our property. This includes snow, and snow is about anywhere from a 5-to-1 to 10-to-1 in terms of the volume reduction. And for those of us that are having water issues right now and are melting all of their water for their house from snow, I can attest it's about a 10-to-1 to 5-to-1. So in this scenario, we're trying to avoid what's called sublimation. So we don't want the snow to skip the water phase and basically go into atmosphere. And the way to do that is to have shade. So basically this tree will cast shade on the snow, and that shade will then allow this snow to slowly melt. Now you can do this with snow fences. This has been done extensively with snow fences to actually hold and capture snow and have it melt in certain processes. And I've also done this with swales and snow fences to help catch and store that water. Other ways to do this is terraces. So having backgraded terraces so that way all that snow melts out. And again, you have to use shade in that situation. Kari, does that help answer your question, or is there other elements of that you're hoping to get answered? Oh, Kari's not here anymore. Oh, she is. Maybe she stepped away. Check the chat. Yeah, so we're on a south facing slope, so it all melts. So yeah, I would use snow fence extensively. I would use that as an interim. I'd start to use trees to keep that from melting. I'd start to use earthworks to hold that melt so it doesn't run off the property. I would use anything I could to create a rough and loose scenario, so that way there's all these little indentations, and where there's indentations, there's life, and then that life can grow. So as much as possible, I would try to undulate and crenulate that property, and then forest or shrub forest, we could do a shrub forest, that's no problem, as much as possible, so that way that snow has a little bit more transit time on site. Does that help? Yeah, awesome, great. Cool. What's your advice for the current assignment for a site that's living with a living room and balcony? Yeah, so the water survey will be the same. The micro watershed map will be, it depends. I've had folks who've done balconies before that have water that courses beside them in like a pipe. And so they followed that pipe up and seen from an ortho photo or Google Earth photo how much water falls on the roof of the house or roof of the building complex or whatever. I've also had folks who have created structures that come off of the balcony and use that to capture water. And this is the one I was trying to find for you. So I would take a look at that as well and use that. And if not, create something like that as a hypothetical to do the assignment. So that way I know that you know how to do it. And this is true for everyone. So if you have a blank slate, just conceive of a straight roof that can capture and store water. So I know you know how to do the assignment. Great, awesome. Oh, we had another question here. Saron, without having a gutter due to heavy load, any solutions you have to avoid ice and snow falling on your head other than avoiding or having entrance doors on the same side? Yeah, create an airlock. So one of the things that we've lost in modern building is that generally any place north of the 49th parallel. So if you take a look at 100 to 120 year, 80 year, sometimes 80-year-old houses, but not much. You'll see that they had airlocks. They had little mud rooms, places where there was a door in and a door out. And then they had a roof over top, an outside unbuilt walled area. So that way you didn't have ice and all the rest of it coming down and hitting you on the head. So that's a built structure conversation. You need to create a built structure that will take that ice and move it away from the house, snow that away from the house and away from the entrance places. So this is true for all our design. We want to make sure that our entrance places have as much usability as possible in the summer and the fall. Great question. All right, folks.
Yeah, I have that happening right now.
Oh no.
Yeah, well, we didn't finish our gutter because we thought that we would be, but then this year was like completely unprecedented with snow and rain, like just like you were saying about your roof not having a gutter on purpose, but we didn't expect that this year. We've got just record high snow amount this year, so it did rip off our gutter, and I'm just like, it did hit our head. And all my plants that was below it, my trees, of course, don't plant trees below the gutter. Yeah. So that's fun.
Yeah. There's a couple of solutions there, and I've done this both in Kenya and also in Canada. Is I've created a lined trench, so not a trench that infiltrates. So it's almost like a French drain, but basically it's a lined trench of rock that's around the house that basically takes that water away from the house and moves it into the landscape. So that can help to take care of the water. In heavy snow loads, I don't plant anything underneath the eaves unless I want to harden them. So we did that with bonsais for a couple of years because we really wanted to find the survivors.
Fancy.
And that worked really well. There's two other strategies for gutters in heavy snow loads. One is you show the snow a very thin lip. And so the way this looks is, let's grab the straight edge tool. So if this is our roof, and normally we would put our gutters maybe like so. So that has a lot of lip being shown. Instead, what we'll do is we'll show it very little lip. And in this case, we'll go kind of inset a little bit more. And this is all dependent on your fascia board. And we'll just show it less. And so what ends up happening is the screw that comes through here has more purchase. And at the same time, it doesn't have as much counter to pull it off. The only other product I've ever seen, and hilariously enough, it was created in Australia, is a snap gutter. And so basically it's a gutter that has a snap hinge that's weight activated. And so basically if it's hit, it'll snap the whole gutter down. And then when it's melted or enough water's out, it'll snap back into place. But I haven't found the shipping to bring it over, and the cost was astronomical. So I basically go with old gutter that doesn't have as much showing on the lip.
Okay.
So that way it just doesn't rip off.
How about for an A-frame architecture? Because the roofs are really, really long and angled. So if you have like snow and sheets of ice just sliding, and you could destroy your deck or anything like that, that is planned there.
Oh no, that was what's called a type 1 error. That's an error that doesn't get better over time. That's an error that gets worse over time. So that's an error in building. So that's a built solution. Does the A-frame go all the way down to the ground, or is there still human height underneath?
There's a little bit, but it's almost to the ground. Yeah. It's,
Yeah. So in that case, there's probably not many solutions. If it was high enough, I would probably create a roof skirt basically around it, and then put that out and giving folks a sense of where they can then come in and without that danger. But yeah, that's a problem of design.
yeah.
Like,
just avoid walking in that area, making it like putting a deck there or any sort of usable. So you're kind of losing that space if you're worried about, I mean, the
During
winter
the
time
winter.
anyways. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, during the winter, like once it gets to physical damage or hazard, I either create a built solution for that, or that just becomes an unusable entrance. It's the same thing for our house. So our house has a 2-story that flows onto a 1-story. And so half of the 2-story flows onto a very small portion of the 1-story, and the doors are directly under that overflow.
Yeah, that sucks.
So we get like 3, 4, 5 feet of snow outside both of our doors. And so I had to build structures out of them. So that way it moved off of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. All right, folks, we've gone a little long, but it was a little problematic starting up. So thanks everybody for your time. And yeah, any questions at all about the work that comes up, feel free to let me know. I'll make sure to update the code in the information now that it's changed. And what else do I have to tell you? Oh, there's a phenomenal webinar coming up that I'm hosting on Friday with Joan Webster, woman who's in her 90s now, who literally, this is the coolest thing, she literally wrote the book on wildfire and bushfire safety in Australia. And it's a brilliant chat. David Holmgren, the co-founder of Permaculture, is going to be joining us as well. Super exciting about that. And if anybody's interested, I'll just put the link in the chat, and it'll also be in the show notes. But it'll be at 5 p.m. Pacific on Friday, and that's to allow for Joan, because of her age. She's got a window of activity, and Saturday is a good day for her. But we'll have a chance to talk about the book itself, called Essential Bushfire Safety Tips, which is phenomenal. Get a chance to hear from David and Joan about their work in bushfire prevention and safety. So I would highly recommend, if you or anybody you know is in a bushfire safety, wildfire safety situation, to attend or to watch the replay. It will be on the YouTube channel afterwards. And yeah, looking forward to anybody who decides to show up. So with that, folks, thanks again. Such a pleasure. Oh, thanks for all the thanks. That's super awesome. And we'll see you in the class, and see you in not 2 weeks, but I think 3 weeks, because we've got a break due to summer break or spring break. So we don't meet next week, and we would have meet the next week after that, but it'll be the following week on the 28th that we come back together. Also keep in mind, from the 19th to the 27th, I will not be grading assignments and will not be around. I will be in a hot spring, as I hope all of you will have the chance to as well. All right, folks, such a pleasure to see all of you. Thanks for your great questions, and we'll see you later on. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Evan.
Yeah, you're welcome.